Welcome to this video on the movement Literary Modernism, which had its origins in the late 19th and early 20th century. It was a time of rising sensibility, introspection, and reinvention. So on this first screen, we can see some of the major authors and players of the time. Do you know any of them? On the left, we have the American writer and adventurer Jack London, then Marcel Proust, James Joyce, and Virginia Woolf. So, what was modernism? Well, it was a fragmentation of old patterns. Modernist literature reflected a changing society. In education, you can see it was more disciplinary in Victorian era, moving towards more of a sense that education is a human right. Science was changing as well. Isaac Newton's laws of physics were being replaced by Albert Einstein's perhaps more wide laws. Universal suffrage arrived in Britain in 1918. Though imperfect, modern society was becoming more representative of minorities. There were advances in science and technology, as I mentioned. So for example, Einstein's general theory of relativity is extending Newtonian physics. And primary education became essentially free in the late 19th century. It was also a time of war, and this affected writers, authors. So First World War in 1914 to 1918, it challenged the long-standing pastoral convention of the Romantic period. So it challenged that feeling that everything is happy and wonderful and beautiful. As Stevenson said in 2016, the war challenged the kind old friendship between imagination and nature. Virginia Woolf, in her novel To the Lighthouse, reflects that the contemplation of nature's beauty was unendurable, the mirror was broken. And in the war poem by Wilfred Owen, Dulce Decorum Est, he said, "Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we curse through sludge." So really showing the harshness and tragedy of war. Owen's visceral poetry uses effects such as simile to relate the horrors of war which he personally witnessed. Modernism, also very much an introspective movement, subjective reality embraced with stream of consciousness narrations, new forms, new styles of writing. In Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, she embraces the interior monologue to bring past, present, and future together on one day in June 1923. According to a New York Times reviewer, Mrs. Dalloway is evidence of experimental achievements that completely broke with tradition. Similarly, in Ulysses by James Joyce, he uses a stream of consciousness narration to explore events and characters of one single day in Dublin. So rather than momentous events, these are ordinary, everyday events which are seen through the light of our interior consciousness to make them really shine. Marcel Proust was an important figure at the time as well. He influenced writers such as Woolf and Eliot. He was famous for a vast multi-volume work called In Search of Lost Time. This spanned the time between 1913 to 27. It took a long time for him to write it. Also playing with stream of consciousness and time, an experimental novel. Rather than being driven by a linear plot, the narrative is propelled by the impulses of memory. Very interesting. In America, Jack London was also writing. He's famous for his novel The Call of the Wild, set in the Yukon of the 1890s Klondike Gold Rush, with the main character a dog called Buck. His novella delves into core life struggles related to self-actualization and what it really means to be human. According to McCrum 2014, London's mythical creature, Buck the sled dog, became his answer to the complex challenges of modernity. And other aspects of modernism, British modernism and the idea of Russia in the early 20th century, Russian society influenced many modernist writers. According to Taunton, 2016, Edwardian Russophilia at the first decade of the 20th century saw a growing interest in all things Russian. In the background, you can see a picture from the British Library which shows the Ballet Russe by Sergei Diaghilev, first seen in Britain in 1911, which apparently impressed the modernist poet and writer T.S. Eliot by its ability to transform the music of the steps into the scream of the motor horn. So using a combination of movement, sound, and industrial effects. In her essay, The Russian Point of View, 1925, Woolf heaps praise on Russian titans of literature such as Chekhov, Dostoevsky, and Tolstoy, calling them, quote, the greatest of all novelists. And in art, modernism was prevalent, so a plethora of artistic movements strive to find their places in an ever-changing world. In the background, we can see the surrealist painting by Salvador Dali called The Persistence of Memory, painted in 1931, which explores time and the nature of reality. You can see how this is connected to literature through stream of consciousness and exploring the interior monologue. Modernist art included movements such as surrealism, cubism, and futurism, which mirrored changing societies. And this art translated over to architecture. So for modernist architecture, often it might be rational and simplistic with minimal ornamentation, so minimal extra features which were seen perhaps as unnecessary, very simplistic. Modern architecture used new materials such as cast iron, plate glass, and reinforced concrete. It followed precepts such as form should follow function, functionalism. It led to larger and more resilient structures such as the Crystal Palace, 1851, and to the Home Insurance Building, 1884, which was the first steel-framed skyscraper. And you can see in the pictures below different aspects of that modernist architecture. Form should follow function, less is more, use of modernist materials, and open plan, spacious interiors. And in religion, modernism in the Catholic Church, theorists start to attempt to reconcile Roman Catholicism with modern culture in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There was this liberal Catholicism, a freeing of the church, influential current thought within the Catholic Church, especially in France. Liberal Catholics such as Louis Duchamp advocated ideas like an enlarged suffrage and a separation of church and state. And in 1863, Ernest Renan published Vie de Jésus, Life of Jesus. He believed that Jesus was an extraordinary man, but only a man, clearly a controversial idea. And that is the end of this short talk on modernism and its influence on literature. I hope that you found this video useful. If you have, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching.